Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome to the 2021 GSHA Virtual Business Meeting and Conference. We hope you are enjoying our conference so far. Please be sure that you are muted and video is off. Questions will be taken at the end of the presentation using the chat box only. So we will not have audio questions. You must type your questions into the chat box. I will read them to our speaker and then he will give you an answer. It is my pleasure and honor to present Mr. Gary De Leon. His presentation will be about the Oñate expedition and the expedition members. Thank you, Mr. De Leon. So if you'd like to take it away, we're ready for you.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or actually we're in the good morning. Depending on where you are. If you're on the East Coast, it would be afternoon. And I'm going to share screen here. I'm going to, I just had it. Okay. Presentation. I'm sorry, guys. I should be the expert at this because I'm a teacher and we do these Zooms all the time. Okay, we're going to look at the Oñate expedition and the expedition members. And I want to thank the GSHA, the Genealogical Society of Hispanic America, for inviting me to this to speak to you today and about this expedition and Oñate. And I'm going to start with, let's see. Okay, we're going to start with, when we speak of Oñate and the expedition, sometimes we see it gives a lot of emotions to different, to people. Some people see him as a hero and some people see him as a villain. To some of us, we see, many of us have expedition members in our family, and we see things like here, the statue in El Paso. We've got a big 36-foot statue of Oñate. And I'm looking at the El Paso area because I'm from El Paso. We get the signs El Camino Real. We have also other signs that say Don Juan Oñate Trail. Sometimes we see festivals that we have that deal with Oñate expedition. We've had some in San Elizario and Isleta, Texas. And the picture down below is a picture of a festival in Española, New Mexico, a few years back. And then even we have, it's kind of blocked by the faces. Let me see if I can show you that. On the rest area near Texas, New Mexico border, they have several items like an old cart made out of wood, which is kind of interesting. They have signs that talk about the Oñate Trail. And we even see like, we've got little landmarks in El Paso, the area where Oñate crossed the Rio Grande. This is near downtown El Paso. So we see things like this. And we even see buildings that have the name Oñate or Romero or other expedition members. So we see this around. So some of us realize that, these people who went on the expedition, if they went through a very difficult expedition, and they also living in harsh conditions, that if they didn't do that, we wouldn't be here today. Now others may not see things the same way. And as we've seen 2 summers ago, we saw some people wanting to take down the statues in Albuquerque. It even got violent where some of the people, at least one person got shot. And then eventually the government took down the statue, the city of Albuquerque, and there have been protests. So it really depends on your perspective. Now, we're not here today to judge Oñate and the expeditions and say, are they heroes or villains? I'm really here to talk about the past. And do realize it does bring some conflicts. And many of us are part Native American. We've got indigenous blood in our DNA from Mexico and from New Mexico. I know as I did my ancestry, I found out that we are part Zuni Indian. So I do understand it could be maybe some conflicts. And so who is this person that's going to talk to you guys for the next few minutes here? Well, let me give you a little background about me. Okay. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'd never been south of Chicago until I got my first job in Houston, Texas, teaching. Now, my grandmother, Luisa Gallegos de Leon, she's really the reason I got into all of this. She used to tell us a lot of stories when I was growing up, mostly about the time she lived in the Great Depression and how they grew up. And then she also told me stories about my grandfather, more or less that she thought he was related to Ponce de Leon. She didn't know how, but anything that had to do with de Leon, she would send us information. She didn't tell us too much about her side of the story. She was born in Bent, New Mexico, and they left when she was, let's see, about 7 years old. So she didn't remember too much of New Mexico, but she started my interest in genealogy and family history. And unfortunately, I didn't write the stories down, and neither did any of my other cousins. So we weren't able to keep her stories. We just kind of, try to remember things in our head. And when you try to remember something that was said 25 or 30 years ago, you may not always remember it accurately. So that's unfortunate. Now I wish I had done that. I also have an aunt on my mom's side who was a genealogist for about 20 years. And every time she met us, every time she came and visited, she always had a story about an ancestor. And she always made it an interesting story. Maybe one time she told us about a story about a pastor who we were religious leaders on that side of the family. He got upset with the church that he was in. He left it and he made his own church. Or, I remember another story where it was during the Civil War that our ancestor changed his name because one of his brothers fought for the Confederacy and he wanted nothing to do with the Confederacy. So he purposely changed the name Meckling, which was spelled Mechlin, to Macklin. He changed it to Macklin. And, those stories, when you make things interesting about history, people remember it. And I think those two really kind of got me going as far as learning family history. But I really didn't do too much about it. In my earlier years, I started teaching social studies. I've been married for 33 years and got 2 kids. So when you're growing up a family, at least I didn't find time to look at my ancestry until after my grandmother passed away and my kids were away in college. I did write an ebook about the history of the De Leon family, and I'm constantly updating that. And I started a Facebook page, Descendants of Oñate Expedition, about 5 years ago. And the reason I did that, well, let me just kind of back up even before I made the Descendants of the Expedition, is how I got into learning about my family history. Is my grandmother asked me to write a family history book when I was just graduating from college. I never did that. And when she passed away in 2013, I said, geez, I never wrote that family history book for grandma. Now I got to do it. So I started looking at just some rudimentary information. And I got into, most of us have done this, ancestry.com. I looked at, when I started doing my research, I started looking at those little green leaves that pop up. You get real excited when you got all these green leaves. And I'll never forget, at one point, I followed the green leaves all the way down to King Ferdinand. And at that point, I thought, oh, I'm royal blood. And I got all excited. In my class, I put all these pictures of these kings. And I started telling everybody I was of royal blood. But one of the speakers yesterday, Antonio Esquivel, he wiped that thing all out. He wrote a story that the Baca line can't be royal blood. A 6-year-old would have had to become pregnant. So I was depressed. I got kind of sad, and I wanted to stop researching. So if any of that happens to any of you, it's just part of researching family history. But after feeling bad about that for a few months, I decided to go back. And this time I'm going to start documenting my work, making sure that before I say somebody is in our family, that I have evidence of it. I just don't accept everything with little green leaves on Ancestry. So as I was doing some research for a few more months, I found out that one of my ancestors went with Oñate on the expedition. And then I found a total of 13 of them went on the Oñate expedition. At that point, I said, well, I have to do something with this information. This is really exciting. So I tried to, I guess they had something in New Mexico, Primeras Familias, and excuse my Spanish, it's not really good. Well, they used to give certificates, but they had stopped because I guess they didn't have the workers to do the research. So that's how it came to be, where I made that Facebook page. And I really thought I might get 50 or 60 people for this. And today we got over 1,800. So it's a neat little website. I've learned a lot from many people who've studied this much more than I have. Some of you have lived in northern New Mexico, and you're in the historical area. You see this all the time. So, but anyways, it's to get back, I have been teaching. I moved to El Paso in 1996, and I will tell you, before I knew about my ancestors going with Oñate, I did not. When I lived here, I looked at the statue and you see the signs, and it didn't mean a whole lot to me. But I think once I found out my ancestors were on that expedition, then I started taking much more interest. Well, so the first part I was doing this is more or less for me, but I think as you learn about genealogy, you start learning that we not only do this for ourselves, but then we start looking and saying, we want our family members to know about this. And you want to leave some kind of information for maybe your grandkids, maybe future great grandkids. So that really, I widened my aim towards that. And then as I was teaching my students, most of my students had no idea of the expedition. They had no idea of really El Paso history. They know nothing about. They don't know much about the New Mexico. They didn't realize anything about the expedition. They were amazed when I told them that we had kind of a first Thanksgiving 22 years before the Pilgrims came. And this isn't common knowledge that's given in the schools. And as I looked further at the curriculum the kids learn, a lot of it is not geared toward the Hispanic kids. 97% of my students are Hispanic. So I think they kind of tune out to a point. But, when I started teaching about a little bit about the background there, I was able to put it in at points. All of a sudden they became interested. They were amazed to hear about, we had a capital, we had people farming and everything before the Pilgrims came. And I gave them a little different perspective. So they really liked that. Okay, so I believe that my shift of emphasis of my research has changed. First it was me, then family. Now it's I'm hoping to teach others and widen everybody's horizons. It's very interesting information. Anyways, I've been teaching since 1996 at Cantu High School, and here's a picture of our new high school. Well, not new, it's about 15 years old now. Beautiful school. And let's take a look at now what we're going to do today. Enough about me. Okay, what are we going to cover? So today I'm going to give you a short background of the expedition and the trail that they took. I'm going to give a description of the supplies they brought. It won't be extensive. I want to show you some of the things they brought and how the Spanish were very big on their records. We're going to do an overview of the expedition members by categories, something I've done a little research and looked at numbers. And then we're going to go over the expedition members. We're going to look at women. Now, generally women are, we don't hear about as much, but I'll show you some interesting information about women. We're going to look at Viagra, the Spanish expedition members from Mexico, the Spanish islands, and then Greece. We actually have one person from Greece. Okay, so let's see. So first of all, real quick, why did Spain decide to go to New Mexico? And in school, we're taught the 3 G's, that the explorers went for God, gold, and glory. And we can certainly understand people want to go for money and they want to go for glory. We kind of see that today, like with Elon Musk and Bezos. They all want to go out in outer space, and they're all fighting to see who could go into space first. And one of them wants to go to Mars. The harder one for us, I think, today to understand is God. But the Spanish did want to go into the Americas to evangelize the Native Americans, to teach them about God. I know that there are some churches that still evangelize very strongly, but in my experience as a Christian, I've not done that. That hasn't been a big need for me. There are some, but that one is a little bit of a foreign idea for me. Okay. Well, starting in 1519, you get Cortez with the help of other native tribes. They defeat the Aztecs, and they take over the area of now what we call Mexico. And matter of fact, I think that they just had the anniversary. I saw on Facebook, people were talking about the date 1519. It's 502 years since that happened. I think it's like 2 days ago. Well, then you started with some expeditions in 1539, 1540. You had Coronado come through here, and they were looking for this fabled 7 cities of gold, stories from Spain, where Spanish leaders had fled Spain when the Moors came through, that supposedly they had taken a bunch of gold with them and made these beautiful cities of gold. And they thought they were somewhere out there in the middle of America for different reasons. They'd heard stories. Well, as several other expeditions went through, they didn't find riches in gold in New Mexico. So they found mostly desert. So for a while, they didn't go through here. This was not an area that they spent too much time. But then to shift a little bit to Mexico, in 1546, they find silver in Zacatecas. And one of the people who founded Zacatecas was Cristobal Oñate, and that happened to be Juan Oñate's father. And he eventually owned the major silver mines in Zacatecas. So many people came to that area, similar to like the gold rush of the United States in 1849. That's the way I picture it. And people flocked to Zacatecas and in search of the riches. Some people made a lot of money. Most didn't make a whole lot. But by 1550, Zacatecas was the second largest city in Mexico. And the reason I'm mentioning Zacatecas is because you see that draw for people coming into the area for riches. And many of our expedition members, including Oñate, came from that area. Okay, so there's a big pull for money and the riches. By 1550, you've got tremendous wealth there. The Zacatecas looked like rivaled the big cities in Europe, had beautiful buildings, people wearing silk made in China. They had beautiful, exquisite furniture. And so the desire for wealth was there, the big push. Now, 1588, the Spanish Armada was defeated. So the Spanish felt like they needed to get more money. They needed to get their prestige back in the world. And they thought, well, we haven't gone to North America that much. Let's start trying to get some expeditions out there and see if we can get some riches, because we've got the wealth in Mexico. Let's, in the lower areas, let's see what's to the north. So we're looking at contracts, and Oñate was not the first person to get the contract. Actually, the first one was in 1589, was Juan Bautista Lomas y Colmenares. He applied for a contract, but he wanted too much land, he wanted too much money, so Spain denied him the contract. And then Francisco de Urinola was given a contract to go to New Mexico and to bring expedition members, but he was accused of trying to kill his wife, so Spain denied his contract. In 1595, Oñate won a contract for an expedition to New Mexico from Viceroy Don Luis Velasco. And once he gets the contract, Oñate started recruiting people from different backgrounds, mostly in the Spanish areas. The Spain wasn't going to let they weren't going to let English or Irish or Russians or anybody else come with them. But, you're looking at people from Portugal, Mexico, the Canary Islands, which was part of Spain. And he also included Indians to accompany him to an area they called Tierra Incognita, which is land unknown. So when he signed people up, it was kind of like a fair festival attitude. They had, big horns. They had drums beating. They had silk flags flying. And Oñate was giving great promises, telling them there's great riches to be made if they join the expedition. He'd signed up over 1,000 people, and it looked like he was going to go with 1,000 a little bit earlier. But what happened was the viceroy left. He was reassigned to Peru, and a new viceroy took his place. His name was Don Gaspar de Zuniga y Acevedo. He was the Count of Monterrey. He was promoted to in that area where Zacatecas was called Nuevo Galicia. They wanted to, this new viceroy wanted to reopen up the contract. He wanted to see who else could do this besides Oñate. And he thought that Oñate was getting too much with this contract, so he wanted to relook at the contract. And I'm sure Oñate wasn't real happy with that. One of the things they wanted to do was, in the old contract, the decisions would have come from the Indies Islands, and this viceroy wanted the decisions to be made in his area, and he wanted to give Oñate less money and he wanted to lessen the power. And Oñate, he agreed to make the new contract, but there's still a 2-year delay. Actually, he did give the contract first to a guy by the name of Pedro Ponce de Leon, and he was a wealthy Spaniard, but it would have been de Leon leading this expedition, but he fell ill, and the king suspended his contract, and then they decided to give it back to Oñate. By that time, he lost a lot of his recruits. It dwindled from 1,000 to under 200. So that was actually a problem. He actually had too few of people, so he had to try to drum up some more people. Now, I forgot to tell you guys that when he brought the 1,000, he took them from Zacatecas to the mining area around the Costco mines, which was in Santa Barbara. And for 2 years, Oñate basically had to house them and feed them. So that tells you it had to cost a lot of money. Can you imagine feeding 1,000 people every day for 2 years? It was costing Oñate a lot of money. As a matter of fact, that was a major issue. They didn't think he was going to have enough money for this expedition. They were still a little bit wavering on letting Oñate lead the expedition. But finally, by December of 1597, they agreed. And now the only thing they had to agree with is which priests were going to go with them. Would it be Franciscan, Jesuits or Augustinians. And if those, some of you don't know about the Catholics, they have different orders of priests. And I won't get into the philosophy what the difference of each one is, but originally they were looking at the Jesuits, but the Franciscans won out. Okay. So they go, and that decision was made by January 10th. Then January 26th, they take off from Santa Barbara. And if you were to look at this group going, you'd call it kind of like a train, not a train we think of today, but this line of people and animals and everything was about 4 miles long and 1 mile wide. Had to be huge just to imagine seeing that going through the desert. Well, let's see why they wanted to go. Oh, sorry. There's a picture of Oñate. So Oñate's reason, Oñate's an interesting guy. Why would he want to go on this expedition? You know, you think of Oñate and you think this guy's very rich, comes from a very rich family. And he was born in Mexico. His dad was born in Spain. So he couldn't get up to as high as in their social standards. His dad was at the highest level. If you know about the Spanish, they had like almost like a caste system where the people up at the top were born in Spain and they came over to Mexico. And then the folks who were born in Mexico, but were Spanish blood, they were on the second level. That's where Oñate was, and he could never go to the first level. Now, he wasn't the firstborn son, so he wasn't going to get the majority of the wealth, but he still was very rich. He still owned several silver mines himself. And I don't know about you guys, but if I was super rich like that, I don't know if I'd want to go out on an exploration. But there's something in people like Oñate that they have that desire to go out and do more things. It reminds me of Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or the guy from the Virgin airplane. He went up in space too. So these guys are super rich. They don't have to go into space. You know, they don't have to do all that, but they want to. You know, there's just that drive, and that's what Oñate had. Well, there's some other reasons that going to New Mexico made sense. First of all, he'd be given the title of governor, and it would go to his family, governor and captain general for 5 generations for all the land they discovered and colonized. He would get a yearly salary. He would have the right to distribute land and collect tribute from the Indians, which is money or goods, and a system known as encomienda. And he was going to get 90 miles of land. At that time, it was called leagues. And then he got to control all the Indians on the land. And he was also exempt from any crown taxes for mines. So he would get, I'm sure he's probably looking at it saying, I can even become richer with this. But what about the colonists? What did they get? Well, the colonists would be awarded the title of Hidalgo if they went and stayed. Hidalgo would be kind of like similar to like in Europe where you're called a knight, which, you know, in the New World, there was no way for these people to move up on their own, but this was a real big thing to be, you know, be a royal blood there in a sense. That's what that does. They can own land, they get exemptions from taxes, and freedom of the fear of being in prison for unpaid debts. So if you owe a bunch of money, nice way of getting out of that. You can find gold or silver. And some colonists were conversos, possibly Jewish. And now the Muslims, I have not found any in my research, but I've read like 2 books that said that was a possibility. And they were trying to escape the Spanish Inquisition. Okay. So what did they bring? I think this is kind of interesting. What they brought and just how all of this was counted by the Spanish. Now, I'm just going to give you an idea of some of the things they brought. They brought thousands of livestock, which would have been cows, sheep. You got to think that when they bring all this food and the the material, they're thinking that they're going to be staying there and they can't just go to the store and get this. Like, we go to Walmart or such. They have to, they're probably going to be lucky to get stuff once a year from Mexico. Okay. So when they prepared for this trip, they brought food, they brought grapevines to make wine. They brought wheat, corn, peppers, they brought different fruits, livestock, they brought iron and tools. So this is where I wanted to share this with you, is that the Spanish were big on numbers. You can actually get the actual numbers of all the stuff they brought. The poor person on the muster roll had to count things individually. Like, for example, they counted 4,890 horseshoes. Wouldn't you like that job, counting those horseshoes? They also brought 13,000 nails. I don't know who that guy was, but that poor guy had to sit there and count 1, 2, 3. Oh, I'd hate to lose count at about 10,000 nails, but that's incredible that they went into that much detail. That's what amazed me. They brought tools that they knew they were going to need, because they probably weren't, I'm going to guess, couldn't make stuff out of iron there. It would be very difficult. So they brought sledgehammers, picks, axes, hoes, plowshares. They also brought these things called adzes, which is like a hoe, but it's vertical instead of horizontal. They brought saws, chisels, augers, and axes. So, if you think about it, you're saying, I'm going to go live by myself away from society for 5 years. Think of all the tools you'd have to bring. Okay. It's amazing just to think about that. They brought 41 reams of paper. They mentioned they brought 4 barrels of wine. And when you got 400 people, that's not very much. 15 jugs of oil. They did bring medicines with them. They brought medicines like sarsaparilla, green ointment, balsam, rose water, alum. And then they brought something to paint the houses with. So if you see like the houses in New Mexico and Colorado, many of them have that bluish green, like that turquoise color. Okay, they brought what's called verticas, and that's what you use to get the blue-green dye in the paint. They brought a lot of glass beads, because they knew they wanted to trade with the Indians. They knew that to get things, they're going to have to bring stuff to trade. And I guess glass beads were something that was also looked on, and they must have really liked, because in part of the mention of the things that they had, they mentioned they had 31 glass bead rosaries, and they had 23 other rosaries. So glass beads must have been something really nice for them to differentiate on the rosaries. And they also brought Bohemian knives. I guess those must have been really good knives back then. They brought small Flemish mirrors, shoemakers' needles, because they realized their shoes were going to go bad. And they actually, one that was very interesting was hawk bells. And these are little bells that you'd put on not the talons, but the legs of the hawk. And in the old days in Spain, they would send messages by the way of hawks, and those bells would tell them when they were coming. I guess that was something that was used like in the Middle Ages, but kind of fell out of disuse. So they had a bunch of hawk bells, and they thought, well, maybe the Indians, we can trade this with the Indians and they'll want these. And, even today, if you see like the dancers, that when they do the dancers, the Indians with the macachinas, they wear the bells, and they, as they shake, you can hear them. We have that. So the Native Americans like the hawk bells. Okay. But those were some of the things they brought. And I think I've said before that they were not going to be able to get things from Spain very easily. I think in later years, they would only get material maybe once a year. Now, some people when they brought their clothes and such, they brought, excuse me, just a moment. Just a moment, guys. I'm sorry about that. For some reason, this is not. Uh-oh. Okay. My battery was running low. I didn't realize I turned off the battery. Okay, so as far as the things they brought, the people later on living in this area, they would only get a train of goods maybe once a year. So you had to learn to live off the land. You had to learn to live off what was out there. Now let's look at the history of the trail itself. And this is the old Camino Real right here. And they got different names and different spots. But this is a 1,600-mile trail. It actually goes down to Mexico City and goes to Santa Fe. And this was being used until 1821. And the indigenous people in America, they used this trail hundreds of years before Oñate. And how do we know this? Well, we find some of the remnants. As a matter of fact, they just found, just recently, within a month, about a month ago, I saw in the news that they had found cocoa in the Chaco Canyons in New Mexico. And this cocoa was made like 1,700, it's grown about 1,700 miles away from El Paso. I'm sorry, not El Paso, from New Mexico. So, how did it get there? They had to go on some kind of trail. This is how they went. But the Indians also traded turquoise, shells, beads. You found exotic feathers and other foodstuffs traveled from northern Mexico over into New Mexico. So there's trade back and forth. And there's even information about items that came from Mexico where they found all the way into Ohio and in the middle, other states in the Midwest where it came from Mexico. So the Indians had a thriving trade. And I'm sure that would be something that others might research this even more and find more information about. Well, this trail itself, the southern part and it's further down south of Durango, from Mexico City to Zacatecas, this area was the southern trail. This was used to haul silver to the capital from Zacatecas. This was called El Camino de Plata, which is the road of silver. And if you wanted to go from Mexico City to Santa Fe and back, it would take you about a year and a half for a round trip. It was a long trail. And it was dangerous, extremely dangerous. Travelers died of thirst. They died of heat, Indian attacks, and disease. And one Spaniard who survived the trail wrote, "Oh God, what a lonely land." So this was even through the 1820s, this was still a difficult trail to go on. Well, let's look at the trip to El Paso. From Mexico to El Paso, among the recruits who departed Santa Barbara with Oñate in 1598 were about 129 soldiers and their families, Franciscan friars, farmers, laborers, servants, and slaves. Oñate's expedition started in Santa Barbara, Mexico, and the distance from Santa Barbara to El Paso was about 382 miles or 615 kilometers. And this trip took 86 days. One of my dogs just came in. Santa Barbara, Mexico today is a town of about 8,700 people. So it's not a very big city, but if you wanted to see what it looked like when they went, this would be some of the trails in Mexico. They obviously went through the Chihuahuan Desert, and some hills in the background. And just to go through a little bit more about the trip, that the trips in the past had always followed the rivers in Mexico to the Rio Grande. But Oñate, let me see if I can go back here. What they would have done is they would have gone from Santa Barbara to the Rio Grande, taken about 200 miles this way, and then follow the river. But Oñate decided to go straight up through the desert, and it would be a faster trip. Now you're going through the Chihuahuan Desert, and these are some of the pictures of the Chihuahuan Desert. You can see it's a rugged area. And they traveled on horseback and on foot and caravan. They had more than 80 ox carts and mule wagons. They had thousands of head of livestock. And people may have joined after they had a muster roll where they wrote down all the names of the people going in December. There may have been people. We don't know who they were, if there were any people. Okay. I've never seen any names of the folks who came, but remember one of the people, I was at another conference, had said that other people may have joined the expedition on the way, maybe some folks who didn't want their name on the muster roll. Okay. Well, anyways, when they started their journey, they went through the Chihuahuan Desert. They first crossed the Conchos River. And this was a fast and deep river at this time, as they usually, they can be in this, well, this was the winter, but it was a fast and deep river. And most of the Spaniards did not want to cross it. So Oñate got on his horse and he went to the river, and he says, come, noble, this is what he told them in English. Okay, he said it in Spanish. Come, noble soldiers, knights of Christ. Here is presented the first opportunity for you to show your mettle and courage to prove that you are deserving of the glories in store for you. So when he said that, then he took the plunge, went into the river. And once they saw that Oñate crossed it, the rest of them followed. It was a very swift river. It wasn't an easy river to cross. And then after most of them had crossed, they actually took the wheels off of some of the carts and they built the temporary bridge so the sheep could cross the river, because sheep, if they're heavy coats, if they cross that river, they're going to drown. So I don't know if maybe they, there's no written record about, well, there's a Viegra, the historian and poet, wrote about this, but he didn't say if maybe they let the women cross on the bridge or if they had to go in the river or not, or the children. I would suppose they probably had the children cross on the temporary bridge, I would guess. Well, after they crossed the Conchos River, they also crossed the San Pedro River. Scouts went ahead to find a trail and they got lost. Eventually they find an Indian. His name was Mompil, and the Indian guide. And help get his freedom, he drew a map for them in the sand and showed them how to cross the desert there. When they crossed the Rio Sacramento, this was still in Mexico, they did this on Holy Thursday and they held a mass. Because of course they have the priests with them. And they took whips and whipped their backs as a way of showing penance, to try to atone for their sins. And the whole camp ran red with their blood. It must have been a sight. On April 1, they had a big rainfall after lack of water, because you're going through the desert, there's not much water. And they named the place where the rained Socorro del Cielo, which is a rain of the help. They hit these sand dunes, which looks like this. This is south of Juarez, and they're called Los Medanos. And they actually went towards the outside edge of it, but still is very difficult to try to get through there. And we know this information because a person by the name of Gaspar Perez de Viegra wrote a poem, published a book, The History of New Mexico. That's in English. He was published in 1610. He published it in Spanish. This is the first record of colonization in the United States. And Viegra wrote about the trip as they're going through Mexico. This is what he said. He said that they ate roots, cactus, berries, and weeds, for their food supply had dwindled to nothing. I'm sure some of that food, they still had food, but that's for New Mexico. That's not for the trip itself. So they just tried to eat the local stuff, which wasn't much. And because of the hot sand, it burned their feet because the shoes and clothes were worn out. And they were so thirsty that their tongues swelled up and their throats dried up. So it was a difficult trip. It wasn't one of real ease. So eventually they get to the Rio Grande, which is present day San Elizario, Texas. And at that time, San Elizario was on the south side of the Rio Grande, and rivers, they jumped their boundaries, and Rio Grande's done that. When they got there, they stayed there for 7 days, and they ate some of the local, the foods, the fish. They had, I'm sorry about that, got lost. Okay. They hunted geese and ducks, so they had plenty of food. They had a lot of food in this area. The Rio Grande was lush with game and animals and fish. And after they rested, at that point, they have a day of celebration. And this is when Oñate puts the Spanish flag on the ground, and he has a cross on a tree. And he claimed all this land from the Rio Grande, from where it started to where it ends, as part of Spain. That's Spanish land. And it's called La Tome. And then they had a mass, first mass west of the Mississippi River in the United States. And then they had a small play. And then they had a huge feast. And the people gave thanksgiving. They thanked God for a safe trip. And that's why many of us call it a first Thanksgiving. Now, they did not meet Native Americans in El Paso at that point. So it's not like the Indians with the Pilgrims, where they broke bread with the Native Americans. The Spaniards basically broke bread with themselves. They won't meet the Native Americans until they're trying to find a way to cross the Rio Grande about 3 or 4 days later. So they don't meet the Manso Indians yet. But they had Native Americans with their group from Mexico. So it's up to you. Some people get upset about it. They're like, this wasn't the first Thanksgiving. People didn't have funny hats, and you didn't have Native Americans eating with our colonists. Well, that's true, but we gave thanks to God for getting us through the desert. So to me, I celebrate 2 Thanksgiving. I'm a guy that likes to celebrate, so I don't have a problem with that. Okay, some people do. So now, after they rested in El Paso, they decided to go to New Mexico, and on May 3rd, they crossed the Rio Grande near downtown El Paso, and this is with the help of the Manso Indians. And this is really hard to try to picture, at least in El Paso. I don't know, the Rio Grande up north is a little more full and it's a bigger river. But in El Paso, the river sometimes it looks like it's about 3 inches deep. And if you go downtown area, you got concrete on both sides, and you're like, that doesn't look like it's too hard to cross. I know my students asked me that when I told them about the story. I said, you got to remember the Rio Grande is now dammed up, but in the old days, it was a much bigger river. The Spanish called it Rio Bravo. It was not an easy river to cross. And of course, back then, you had hills, and you couldn't just cross it with the ox carts. You had to find a place. So the best place that the Manso Indians told them to cross was near downtown. And today they have a little, I showed it to you earlier, there's a little landmark there, like it looks like a little headstone that shows this is where Oñate crossed. And it was the shallowest part, but that's where they crossed, and they started their trip to New Mexico. Now they went further north, they went past Las Cruces, and then they hit this area called the Journey of Death, or Jornada del Muerto. And that area is 90 miles of very rugged trip. It's right here where they got away from the river. and you can see the mountains. And the reason I've wondered about this when I was first looking at this, why not just follow the river? It would have been it's pretty close to the mountains, but the other thing is that the ground was so soft, you couldn't get the carts through there. So it would have been very difficult. So they had to go away from the mountains. And for this 90 miles of stretch, it's harsh desert. Okay. This, if you were to go there, you know, this area has got mesquite, creosote bush, soap tree yucca, cholla, claret cup cactus, and barrel cactus. And you do have some what they call buffalo grass in this area. And you got pumice and basalt stones are in this area. So it's not the easiest area to travel. Well, it's the reason why it's called Journey of Death. It's obviously not easy. Well, July 11th, they arrive at San Juan. There are 60,000 Pueblo Indians in that area. Now, it does not mean they saw all 60,000, but there were a lot of Native Americans. And if you look at the numbers, you had less than 500 Spaniards. It would have been real easy for these Native Americans to kill all of them, but they didn't. And you can go into longer stories, maybe as they saw the folks coming, they obviously must have known about the Spaniards before this. And the reason I say that is because Native Americans had been traveling back and forth through the years on the trails. My guess is they probably heard about the Spaniards overtaking the Aztec Indians, and I'm sure they would have known about the Aztec Indians just from the trade route. But also, if you remember, there were some Spanish expeditions that went through New Mexico over the years, so it wasn't like a totally new people that had come through there. And perhaps they thought maybe the Spaniards could help them too. But matter of fact, the Native Americans helped the Spaniards in their first early years with food and helped them with the early building, things like the irrigation, acequias, and the churches. Up to 15, I read in one article that up to 1,500 Native Americans helped them build when they first got started. So there seemed to be a spirit of at least helping each other when the Spaniards got here. Now, Oñate, when he in New Mexico, I put Mexico and Spain, when he got here, he looked for gold and silver, and they sent out expeditions, and they were also looking for an access to the North Sea. They thought that somehow they could, for trade, they'd find a better way to go. They never found it. And they called it this mythical Strait of Anine. They thought it was somewhere in North America. So they traveled from California to Kansas in search of gold, silver, and also that way, another way to India, another way to get quicker way. Now, the reason up till now I've talked about this, you're saying, well, if you're not familiar with Oñate before this, you might say, why are people consider him a hero or villain? And the one thing that does happen is the Battle of Acoma. This could probably take another whole hour to discuss. I just, most of us have heard about it. Some of us have actually visited the site. I got to see it when I was near Española one year. And this is a picture of it with the building on top. And you can see that these cliffs are about 400 feet high. It would have been very difficult to get up there. This is a well-made fortress. The Acoma used what was out there in nature and built on top of it. And the Acoma Indians, I think is Rich Martinez, the state historian. I hope I got his name right. He had a whole document or a whole episode on this. He talked about it, gave pretty good insight. But if you want to know more about that, but the Acoma Indians, what happens is they kill 4 or 12 Spaniards. Spaniards go up there, and there's different accounts as to what happened when they went up there. The Spaniards claim that they were trading with the Native Americans. Native Americans didn't give them the material they wanted. I've also heard stories that the Spaniards were asking for tribute. The Native Americans got upset. And also the Native Americans had accused some Spaniards of raping their women, and they wanted the Spaniards to bring these people to justice, and they didn't. So the Acoma Indians were mad. Regardless of what happened here, the Acoma Indians had thrown 12 of the Spaniards, I think 14 of them, 2 actually survived. They threw 12 people over these cliffs, and that's a 400-foot fall. You're not going to be pretty hard to survive that. Well, when the news got back that the Indians, the Native Americans did this to the Spaniards, obviously Oñate got very upset, and he had talked to some of the other people in his group, talked to the priests, and they decided they need to attack the Acoma Indians. So there's the Spaniards, it's amazing to think that they would have gone up these cliffs and fought them, the Acoma Indians. 129 soldiers went up there, and it's different accounts how many Acoma natives fought them. But it was a 2-day bloody fight, and the Spaniards eventually win. But where he gets in trouble is they capture the Acoma Indians, and they decide to cut off the right foot of the males that were over 18. So that's the one where a lot of people get very upset. And just a side note, war is ugly, bad things happen. I'm not excusing it. I know the Spaniards, when they were fighting in Mexico, they saw the Chichimeca Indians, they fought against them. And the Chichimeca Indians, when they killed someone, they would cut the head off, put the head on a stick, and parade the dead head around. So back then, people did some very brutal things. Okay, I'm not saying they're right; they were brutal, but this was not out of the norm for when they had the battles. I'm going to go over now the demographics about some of our expedition members, their ages and demographic. And one of the things you're going to see is they are a diverse group. They all didn't come from one area. Now, I got my information from the muster rolls and Gary Felix's website on the muster roll. He has the names in alphabetical order. It's wonderful. And let's just take a look at what we found out about them. Hold on, I jumped. Okay. Let's start with the women who came on the expeditions. Now, there isn't much information about the women. There's not something there until there was a person by the name of Saldivar. He had a list 1610 of the women in New Mexico. So that's as clear as a picture as we're going to get. The names of the women are not on the muster roll. And but the women traveled with the men, and the scribes generally wrote about, as a male-dominated society. So, but we know these women were courageous. We know that even though we rarely hear about their names, they did quite a bit on the expedition. There was at least 25 women traveling with the expedition, and they contributed to the survival of the expedition through their skills in cooking, mending, washing, nursing, and packing. And it was the women who cared for the sick and comforted the soldiers and other travelers who died along the way. So the women played a vital role, but I'm going to show you that there's some women that even went further than that. Okay. But let's take a look at the data on the expedition members. And I put this information together. I found out that when you look at, I'm going to start with the jobs. We had 12 missionaries, the priests, You had 11 captains, 6 alferezes, which is a little bit lower than a captain, and 2 sergeants. Now, they don't really mention too much about the occupations of the people, except for an accountant and a treasurer. So that tells me the Spaniards were big on records. And in 1604, Oñate sends his brother to Spain to recruit craftsmen. So that also tells me we probably don't have a whole lot of craftsmen in this group. When we look at the numbers, about 94% come from Spain, Mexico, and Portugal. So when you look at that, that's 187 of the soldiers or the people were from Spain. Flemish, which is Belgium, at that time was part of the Spanish. Spain controlled Belgium at that time. Portugal, you had 8 soldiers, which is 3%. The only other big one is the Canary Islands, and that's part of the Spanish Empire too. So really, if you put that together, that's the big areas where they come from. And there were 2 that came from Cuba. And interesting that 19 people had families, 13 came with their wives. So most of the women were, well, when you look at the women, they were either married or they were servants or they were very young and they came with their families. I only have one girl that I know, one woman that was unmarried. Okay, but we don't know that because nobody wrote about it. Okay, we're just going on information. Now we'll also notice that the majority of people are fairly young. 60%, over half of them are under 30 years of age. And if you look at this area, about 83%. And we also have, but we do have 10 people who are 50 years or older. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I'm 58 years old myself. I can't imagine going on an expedition like that at my age. Maybe I'm not in the best of shape for 58, but I wouldn't want to do it. And there were 129 soldiers from what I saw. And since 176 people brought armor, it tells me that more than just the soldiers brought armor, other people had that. And over half of them had their horses. So I don't know what you'd do without a horse. I guess you'd walk. 10 people had servants. And I know that one of the presentations I heard, somebody had said most of the people were rich. They really weren't, just 10 of them. And of those 10, only one decided to stay. So, the folks with the servants, I think they came for the riches, and when they weren't there, they left. 17 were sponsored by Oñate, which means they didn't have enough money. So he sponsored them. And of those people, only one stayed. And if you're to make some kind of conclusion that if you don't put money in yourself, you're probably be more likely to get out. That's what I got out of it. You weren't going to stay in there. Interesting thing is most of the people who had families stayed. And this is just my belief, is I think if you brought your family, you probably sold everything in Mexico and you got rid of everything. You put you're putting all your chips, everything you have into New Mexico. So you're going to make it work because there's really nothing to come back to. So that's the way I see that. If you look, the person who did the muster roll, he wrote about beards and he describes them. He says some people were beardless. Most had beards. Some had black beards, light beards, scanty beards, full beards. Interesting, there were a lot of redheads. I don't have the number on that. I thought I had that. I was amazed to see that we had that many. And I'm just going to go through I ran a little bit longer than I wanted to on the the actual expedition. So I'm going to zip through this real quick. I'm going to start with Isabel de Olvera, and she was known as the first feminist. And she came with the Oñate expedition in 1598, and she asked for her rights of freedom when she went to New Mexico. She was single and a mulatto, which means, part black. The following statement she gave, she said, "As I'm going to New Mexico and have reason to fear that I may be annoyed by some individuals, since I'm a mulatto and given it proper to protect my rights in such eventuality by affidavit showing that I'm a free woman, unmarried, and the legitimate daughter of Hernando, a Negro, an Indian Magdalena." We don't know what happened to her, but she was one who said, I'm not going to have anybody run my life, that by having her lawyer write that up in Mexico. Doña Eufemia is called La Valorosa, and she's known for her bravery. And I'm just going to go through what she did, because I had a writing by Viagra, but I won't have time to read all that. What she did was she told the settlers when they were in Santa Barbara and they were waiting to go on the trip, many of them wanted to leave. And she basically made an impassioned speech and told them that we need to stay, that, she told them, "You're brave, gallant souls. This is not the time to turn your back on the expedition." So they did stay while she said that. And then the second thing she did was when the men took off to take part in a battle, they were in San Juan de Caballeros. She actually, they heard that the Native Americans were going to attack their village. So she led the women, and they got rifles and got on the top of the buildings and protected the village against an Indian raid. The Indians, when they saw that the women had guns, decided to turn back. This lady, Doña Eñas, was very important to New Mexico for them to do better. She was basically the interpreter for Don Juan Oñate and helped the Spaniards talk to the Native Americans. It's similar to what the person they call La Malinche, where she was an Indian who helped Cortez, much the same way. That's why they call her La Malinche. We had some interesting stories of witches in New Mexico background. You had one lady, Maria de Zamora, was accused of witchcraft and sorcery by her son-in-law. She had a daughter that married a soldier when the daughter was 12 years old. Mom probably wasn't too happy about that. So she gave her daughter some poison to kill the husband. And when the daughter didn't give the medicine, she told on her mom. And she claimed that her mother took actions of the witches, like kissing the hind quarters of a billy goat. I can't imagine doing that. And also being able to walk through walls. Well, Father Escobar judged this case, and they kicked her out of San Gabriel, and she died shortly after. We also had Alonso Barba's wife, Maria Martin, was poisoned by Maria Bernal, with whom Alonso was having relations. So when people cheated on each other, I guess the women took it in their own hands. You also had the son of Geronimo Marquez. Hernando was living with a concubine by the name of Juana de la Cruz in 1628. And a witch by the name of Beatrice was hired to place a hex on him. And when Hernando died, they listed the death as the reason is witchcraft. Okay. I'm going to just quickly go over from Spain, just kind of show you guys. I know I'm just about out of time. Is if you look, this is where the expedition members were from Spain. You'll see that a lot of them were from the northern part, some from the central, really nothing from the east or down south. I thought that was kind of interesting. Now, these are the ones that stayed. But I even noticed on the expedition names, most of them were from this area or from the north. And
I do want to do something else with that information. I want to learn a little bit more. But when we look at Bartolome Romero, he was an interesting person. He came from Corral de Amagur, Spain. He died in 1625 in Santa Fe. His son, Matias, was born actually on the journey to New Mexico. And his wife was Lucia, was born in 1575 in Toledo, Spain, which is about 25 miles from where Bartolome was born. She died in 1632 in Santa Fe. Her father, Pedro Robledo, was the oldest member of the expedition. He should have been 60 years old. I'm sorry, I got 66. I'll have to change that later. Well, he was born in Toledo, Spain, and he died in New Mexico near Las Cruces. So that's where you see Robledo Mountain, Robledo Pass. That was named after him. And he immigrated from Spain in 1576.
5 minutes, Gary. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. I'm gonna zip through some of this. I'm gonna cut a little bit. But what's interesting about Pedro Robledo is he was a lay commissioner. And he was the one, they were the ones who led the Spanish Inquisition. And the Spanish Inquisition had actually punished one of the Romeros, one of the cousins of Bartolome. So I'm sure when Bartolome Romero, when he went to ask for the hand of Lucia, that must have been pretty interesting because Pedro probably knew the name Bartolome Romero. They were conversos, which means that his mother and father were Jewish, but they converted to Catholicism. So he had probably had a run-in with them. And I'm sure Bartolome Romero, if he had a cousin who was persecuted by the Spanish Inquisition, he must have known about Robledo also. So that Geronimo Marquez, he was the most loyal captain of the Inquisition. I'm sorry, not the Inquisition, expedition. And he was born in Sanlúcar la Mayor, Andalusia, Spain. And he was described as being swarthy and black-bearded. He traveled with his wife, Doña Ana Mendoza, and he brought 5 sons. Okay. While he's in New Mexico, he was part of the group that punished the 4 deserters when they tried to steal horses in September. He also was in the Battle of Acoma. He was a member of the Loyal Minority Party when there was a large-scale desertion in 1601. So he was exiled from New Mexico in 1614. Asensio de Archuleta, he was from the Basque region, which is the same region where Oñate's father was from. And he was 26 years old at the time of the expedition, and he was described as a medium build and black beard. Okay. He escorted 4 friars from Mexico City to San Gabriel. And I know I'm going to just cut these real short here, guys. I'm just going to show you that most of the expedition members from Mexico were either from the Mexico City area or Zacatecas. So that's where most of those folks were from. Gaspar de Perez de Villegas was a poet and historian. He went to college, graduated in Salamanca. So we have a college person who was in this. Now, he didn't stay. He went back to Spain and he tried arguing a case, trying to help Oñate and other people. The Spanish crown didn't want to hear about it. He eventually tried to go back. He did go back to America, but died on board before he got to Honduras. And Hernan Martin Serrano, he was from Zacatecas, and he was the sergeant of the expedition, Sargento, and he did bring, I'm going to have to, sorry, I'm going to cut some of this. I just want to show you that, Alonso de Sosa, let me go to him. Albornozo, he was killed for wanting to go back to Mexico. He was not one of the loyalists, but he had 5 kids. And when they couldn't make a living in 1601, he asked to go back. And Oñate actually gave him permission to go back. But before he could leave, he was stabbed to death by Zaldivar and 4 other men. Okay. We did have some people from the Spanish islands, and I'll just say the names real quickly. I won't be able to go through the whole background. San Juan Lujan, he was born in La Palma. He's the age of 27, and he was with Francisca Jimenez, a Native American from New Spain. Captain Ruiz de Cáceres, he eventually became the high sheriff, but he was also from this area. The last person I'll go through is Juan Griego. I'm not going to read that whole thing, but I will have this available to you, plus the other information. He was called the Greek, and the only non-Spaniard to go through, but he was at that time 32 years old at the time of the expedition. And he was married to Pascuala Bernal, an Aztec Indian, and she died in 1626. So the Griego family has been around for, that's a big name in New Mexico. And his son was killed by Santa Clara Indians in 1680. And even today, we have many members who are descended from Griego. I'm one of them. Matter of fact, one of the teachers that works with me found out that we're cousins related from Juan Griego. All right. Well, guys, if you want to learn more, you got some great genealogy societies, including GSHA. I get a lot of my information from the Origin in New Mexico families. And here's just some other groups that you can get information. San Elisario Genealogy and Society. Okay. And I will make my PowerPoint available. I will have a bibliography if anybody wants to see where I got my information. So with that, I'll go with questions at this point. Do you want me to stop share now?
Sure. Unless you can probably look at your own thing though to see if you need it for answering questions. So
Okay.
yeah, we'll go ahead and unshare. And I'll read the first question from William Mondragon. How many people came on the expedition with Oñate in 1598?
Okay, there are different numbers. I've seen numbers of about 334 to 500. I did see in several other sources where they went up as high as 800. I don't think there were quite that many. I think under 500 would probably be a pretty good number on that, because a lot of these people were not put on the muster roll, the women, the children. And I know when El Borrego has given his presentations, he said that other people may have also joined after they left, that they weren't on the muster roll. Maybe they got in some trouble in Mexico or such, and they joined the expedition, but that we don't know of. I don't have records of that.
Okay. And George Sanchez did mention Jeff Bezos's girlfriend, who is her last name is Sanchez, although I think she goes by the name Grimes. She's some kind of musical person. But he says, I would like to do her genealogy to see if she was one of my cousins. If she is, maybe I could get a free ride in the next trips to space. So,
there you go.
Frank,
you got to work with angles.
Yeah. Frank Dominguez says, my ancestor Bartolome Delgado was one of the farmers/ranchers that sold foodstuffs to the Oñate expedition when they were encamped in the San Bartolome Valley. And then he did do a longer name for those Sandus Los Medanos de Samalayuca.
Right.
I think that's how you say it. Rebecca Hunter says Bezos was born in Albuquerque.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that. Frank Domingo says north of El Paso, they saw the tracks of the Castano de Sosa party. The Castano de Sosa party was being returned to Nueva España.
Yes.
George also asks or says, in the map, if the red line represents Oñate's trail, shouldn't it be to the right of the Rio Grande between Juarez and where the Coronado del Muerto starts?
It
And
should be
then-
the right, isn't it? I think that's how it showed on that map. It showed it was to the right.
Okay,
Because
and
what you see is the Rio Grande, and then they showed to the right was a kind of a straight line. What you saw was the river and then some mountains and then off to the right. That's, I probably didn't point to the right area because when I had my little pointer, I was showing there's the mountains and then off to the side.
mhm.
And that's also where it's not the exact area I-25 goes north-south, but it's
Gary,
parallel. Yes.
look at your map. You put the red line to the left of the Rio Grande River.
I'd have to look, but I thought I had it to, actually it was made by in another book. I'll
And-
have to look though, George, but I'll if that's true, I'll pull that one off and put another one on.
Frank Dominguez says it's probably just a generalized map, so let's see. And then Frank also says in 1604, my ancestor Andres Cordero may have sold foodstuffs to Oñate's brother. If the brothers stopped in San Bartolome to buy supplies, I would assume they did stop to and fro. Okay, let's see.
And that's his brother who was going to look for, they're hoping to find other craftsmen. So he leaves in 1604 to go to Spain.
Right, and Linda Sena Koba, I think it is, although her name is cut off on my screen. Oh, there it is. Says, thank you, Gary. I never tire of hearing about these tough men and women who came to New Mexico. Oh, Ariana Paul corrected me. Grimes is with Elon Musk. Okay, thank you. I don't know too much about it.
Well, maybe we could get a free electric car then. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Priscilla says, Captain Pedro Varela Jaramillo, did he come on the Oñate expedition or did the family come to New Mexico after the 1692?
Oh boy. What's the last name? Villarreal?
Varela Jaramillo.
Okay, that name I'm not offhand. I don't know. I can quickly take a look. For some reason, I don't. There's some names I would kind of pick up because we have some Villarreal. No, I don't see it on the list here.
Okay.
But then that could have been after 1690.
Yeah. Okay. So probably some more research is needed.
Yeah.
Margaret Beckman says, how do you get the names of the people on the expedition? Is there a resource?
Yes, there is. In the one that alphabetized it, you could actually go to they have a muster roll online. Actually, we have that on our Facebook page under resources, and it's the 1580 or 1598 Entrada muster roll. And also the website I like to look at is Gary Felix's. If you look up Gary Felix Oñate Expedition, if you Google that, he's actually alphabetized the names. He makes it real simple, and he puts the names, and then on the side, just the comments on the muster roll. So if you wanted to, I'm sure there's a site where you could actually read what they originally wrote, but he put it in English, and he did a real nice job on that. He's got a website where if you want to know about other expeditions, I haven't really looked at the other ones, but he's got all kinds of things. He's got Cortez, he's got different surnames and such, but that's the one I like to use is Gary Felix's.
Okay. Linda Senacoba says, do you know where San Lorenzo is? Is it in the El Paso area of what is now Mexico area?
San Lorenzo, yes. It's I believe that's on the south side of the Rio Grande.
Okay. And then Linda Serna asks, how long did it take to get from El Paso to San Juan?
Okay, so if you're looking at May 3rd to July, what did we say, July 20th, a little over 2 months, actually almost 3 months, because it's May 3rd to July 20th, a little shy of 3 months.
Okay, long time. Laura Hisarote, I'm sorry if I butchered your name, Laura, put a link there for the Gary Felix website in the chat. So if anyone wants to make note of that, thank you very much. So did Ariana Paul. Hector Islas says, thank you for the presentation and for all the work and research you have done. You made us all smarter. Rebecca Hunter says the Colorado Hispanic Genealogist, Volume 10, Number 4, Winter 2013 by Joe Gallegos, article for Juan de Oñate and the Colonizers of 1598 to 1600. So I guess that's where the muster list is that. I'm not sure. She didn't put anything else except for the number and the title, I guess. So Rebecca, if you can clarify what information is in that.
I wonder if that's something we'd be able to get to.
Oh, list of soldiers / colonizers, etc. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, there's numerous sources out there. I wonder if that's one you can get without being a member of the group, or if it's free, because I know sometimes we have to.
I think you can probably back copies or whatever, whether you're a member or not, I would think.
Okay.
Maybe just go to the website. Or if you're a member of FACC, we might have those in our library. So you can call Tom and make an appointment and go over there and pick it up. So, okay. Any other questions, folks? Okay. And Gary, do you have contact information if anyone has further questions, email or the Facebook group?
Let me give you both of them on here. It's Mr. Whoops, I spelled my. Oh, you're welcome, everybody. Appreciate it. Mr. Gary DeLeon at gmail.com. And if you go to the Facebook page, it's the Descendants of the Oñate Expedition. Whoops. And we try to make our Facebook page, guys, just more information. I know that some people, we sometimes get into some little heated discussions. I try not to get real, we don't get political on there. And we do realize there's some issues that people have very strong feelings about. So we let them have it to a point, but as long as we're not name calling or anything. I know, like when the statue controversy in Albuquerque brought out strong feelings both ways. We have some people who thought the statue shouldn't be there in the first place, and many others who thought that it was a horrible thing to take those statues down. So, but overall, it's been a lot of fun. And guys, we have so many people who have just great amount of knowledge on there that I've learned a lot from. I've really enjoyed my time doing that.
Okay.
And Linda's the co-moderator. She's done a great job. I thank you enough to Linda for that.
Thank you, Gary. I just wanted to say I posted on there to join your Facebook site, Descendants of the Oñate Expedition on Facebook. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So even if you say, well, I'm not a descendant, but I want to learn more about it, we welcome you. We don't, we don't have harsh requirements for joining. we got people all over the world who've joined this thing.
Yeah, so, very good. Very good. Well, I'll definitely give that a look myself. It's very interesting. Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. De Leon, and to everyone who attended. I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone did, and it was a wonderful presentation. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
I
All right,
enjoyed it.
so if there are no other questions, great presentation. There's another
Oh, thank you.
website, HispanicGen.org Journal Index. Okay, so quickly, I'll give you guys another minute to get all of that, those links. But if you need to, you can go ahead and leave the meeting. And thanks for attending. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Gary.
I'm sorry, Phyllis. I just wanted to say, Gary, I think next time you need an hour and a half.
Yeah.
You have a lot of information to share.
If they give me an hour and a half, I'll go an hour and a half. It's like I
Okay,
tell
we'll
them in
think
my
that
school,
next
don't give the
time.
guy a microphone. He goes on forever.
Thank you, Gary.
Sure.
Okay. All righty. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Yes, thank you for attending.
Bye-bye.
Bye.